Hello, this is Nancy Flinchbaugh with spiritualseedlings.com. I'm an author, and my most recent book, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle, discusses racism. And so I'm conducting a series of interviews talking about race. I'm doing this in part as a tribute to my late friend, Winky Mitchell. Today I'm interviewing Dr. Pamela Young, who is a clinical professor and associate dean in the School of Education and Health Sciences at the University of Dayton. Her long career in Ohio public schools included 12 years as a principal at Snow Hill Elementary in the Springfield City Schools, where my sons attended. She also is a wife and mother, and now a widow on this, the second anniversary of the passing of her wonderful husband, Willie Young Sr. Dr. Young is also a longtime member of St. Raphael's Catholic Church. Well, good morning, Dr. Young. It's so good to be here with you this morning to talk about race. And I'm holding these conversations in part as a tribute to our mutual friend, Winky Mitchell, who, as you know, passed away a couple months ago, a week before I was supposed to interview her to talk about race. So could you just tell me a little bit about your friendship with Winky and how excited you think she might have been that we're having this conversation this morning?
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Nancy, please call me Pam. And I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, to think and talk about our friend Winky. And, you know, I and my late husband, Willie, have been members of the Springfield community since the mid-1970s. And I think we probably met Winky fairly early in that adventure. Now, I can't remember if it was directly related to St. Raphael Church or something else. I'm just not sure. Could have been city schools. Because I was a longtime employee of Springfield City Schools, and I know Winky was as well. But one of the things I am clear about, Winky sponsored Willie Sr. as he became a Catholic Christian. And so our families became very much intertwined because she was part of our spiritual life. I know she would be excited about this conversation because it's a conversation that we need to have, not shy away from. It's very timely. Sadly, it's been timely for a long time, for many generations, and we can't stop having it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I just want to start by, and you kind of almost have answered this question, but what do you think is the significance about having this conversation about race in America today, and why is that important?
I think it's important for us to have the conversation because race has bubbled up as a topic in many different ways. It's become very political and almost stifling for our young people, whatever level of school they may be in, because I think there's confusion among adults, which gets passed to confusion to children. And sadly, when there are not honest conversations going on, it makes it very difficult for young people to know what to believe and how to act.
Yeah, I can hear what you're saying. As an educator, you're very concerned about the confusion that some of the conversations are causing for our young people and for all of us, really. As a person of color, have you had personal experiences of racism? I imagine you have had a few, but how's that impacted you in your life?
I'm going to say, Nancy, the most troubling situations have been in regard to my concern. I have one child, one adult son, and as we know, Black males are very much often profiled and have experiences that are scary for them and certainly scary for their family. So even though I've had my own experiences, I will say the experience of being the mother of a Black male has had me on edge when he was in school, and he is now married. He is in an interracial marriage. We know that that is one of the sets of issues that continues to bubble to the surface. So as much as I love the newlyweds and love my new daughter, I am daily concerned about the world around them. They are across the country in San Francisco that I don't know at all. So I am hopeful it is a place that is very much accepting, as our Ohio had been here in Springfield, and they lived in Columbus before they moved. But there have been instances of my being aware of situations that were clearly racially involved and under the surface of the iceberg that really called some things into question, particularly when he was in high school, more so than now.
Yeah, I've heard that people have to teach their children how to respond in those situations, things that I, as a white parent, would never even have to worry about. But you have to be concerned about, be fearful, and also to teach your child how to respond to the racism that they may experience.
Yes, and also, Nancy, to have allies around the children, because I love my son and I know that he has the ability to be a wonderful young man as he continues to be. But he's also a young man who at certain times I knew wasn't going to be perfect in school. And to watch situations where he might be isolated when there might be another child who looked like you instead of looking like me, and Willie Jr. would get called out and penalized and the other person wouldn't. Multiple instances of that, particularly in high school. As much as the Springfield City Schools tried to do a really good job, but there are multiple individuals who can take actions, and some of them were not always positive ones.
Yeah, and as I've read research about the schools across the country, it's often the case that African American students are not treated the same as their white counterparts. And a lot of times I think white people don't realize what they're doing. They think they're just being responsible, and they're actually treating people very differently. So still a lot of education that needs to be done. That brings us to the topic of race in schools. Do you think it's important to discuss race in schools today, and how would you suggest we go about that?
I absolutely think it's important to talk about race in schools at all levels. And I think one of the ways we can go about that, I'm a big fan of libraries. Had my first paid job in a library, always loved the children's section and the adolescent books. And as you know, I was a longtime elementary principal at Snow Hill School here in Springfield. And one of the things I think we did very well intentionally, with the help of our then librarian who has passed away, Lucille Cronin, is that we did a great job of finding a variety of books that would expose young people to characters that they could relate to. And issues now, we have authors who are intentionally providing opportunities to have books that young people can read and discuss. And as you know, I'm sure there are some of those books being banned to not allow our young people to have access to books by some very well-known and very timely authors, such as Ibram X. Kendi, who has written books not only for adults, but also young people, and was recently featured in a webinar that I had the opportunity to watch, that once again was enabling some courageous conversations. Don't ban the books. Let the young people have the opportunity to have a facilitated discussion with those of us who are willing and able to facilitate that.
I read his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I know he has a version of that for younger people that our youth in our church read a couple of years ago. And I hear what you're saying, don't ban the books. And I want to thank you for your work, because I know when my sons were at Snow Hill, they developed a respect for Black history. And also, I remember one Martin Luther King Day, one of my sons was just sitting in front of the TV on his own, watching a documentary about Martin Luther King Jr. And, he just wanted to be there listening to that. We didn't turn it on for him. And I'm sure that was partially due to what happened in school. So thank you for helping teach my children. I appreciate that.
Thank you. That was my pleasure and privilege.
When I was curious, when you studied history in school, did you learn about the issues of racism in the United States?
Well, it's interesting that you ask about that, Nancy. I'm going to say probably not so much at school, although I am a graduate of Shaker Heights High School. And Shaker is an inner ring suburb, as you know, around Cleveland. And Shaker did a fairly good job. We had a very diverse community that included Jewish students, as well as Black and white students, as well as Asian students. We had a very diverse community. So I'm going to say there was some intentionality in my junior high and high school years, but I spent my elementary years in Cleveland Public Schools, and that was a hard time in the 60s and 70s for there to be a whole lot of conversation, although there were individual teachers who did a better job than others.
Okay. Yeah, I just really can't remember much discussion when I grew up in the Dayton public schools. And I got out of 8th grade in 1968. So, it's right in the time that all the things are happening. I just don't remember my teachers talking about it. So now they're talking about critical race theory, and that's kind of a lightning rod. I just wondered, are you aware of that? And do you think it's being taught in the schools, and at what grade level? What's your perspective on that?
Well, first of all, I think I
don't have an answer for that. Is there something else I
Sorry. Oh my. I guess I could cut that out pretty easily.
Oh, that's cute.
I thought
Well, I do have an answer for that.
maybe I should leave that in there. I don't
Leave, leave it right in there. I think it's a very human conversation we're having. What I know about critical race theory is that it was intentionally designed by Kimberly Crenshaw for higher education, not for pre-K through 12 schools at all. So what I have observed is that there's a whole lot of conversation about critical race theory by people who don't even know what it is, don't know where it was intended, don't know anything about it, and don't have a clue other than it has the word race in it. And that is something that causes some people fear.
Yeah, it's kind of an analysis of race across the history, something that younger people probably don't have even the conceptual ability to understand yet, right? But,
exactly. But it's not taught in pre-K through 12 schools. So
Yeah.
There's no reason for there to be this hubbub about it being taught when it's not taught in pre-K through 12.
So that leads us to another question. Have you taught about race issues? And I know you've mentioned some things you did at the elementary level, and now you're at the higher education level. How have you personally been involved in teaching about race? And do you think that ever upsets your students? I mean, that's another thing I hear, that they're concerned that the students are going to be upset and feel bad about themselves.
Well, if you don't mind, my nose is misbehaving. So give me just a second, please. And currently, I teach at the University of Dayton. I am a faculty member, and my course that just wrapped up last evening is an Intercultural Proficiency and Leadership course for our doctorate, educational doctorate. But I've also taught that course at the master's level. And what's interesting is that I designed the course with a colleague, Dr. Nano Nene, and the two of us intentionally looked for ways that we could help bring folks along a continuum, to take people where they were and to recognize that there were agreements that we were going to make during our very first class. There's no blame. We all are on a journey, hopefully, toward cultural proficiency. There are going to be times when we aren't going to agree, and that's okay. But we are also going to have courageous conversations and have conversations with each other to help each other and to build a learning community. And I will tell you that I was so excited. One of the tools I use is a feeling wheel several times throughout the course, which is a wheel that has multiple words, and the young people can pick and choose how they are feeling about our course at any point in time. And it was interesting that at some point about midpoint through the semester, the answers I was getting were they were starting to feel overwhelmed, not because of my course necessarily, but it was earlier in late October, early November, all of the election things going on. There are other courses they were taking, assignments. But last night, our last class, they were talking about being called to action. And that brings us back to our friend Winky. You know, that was one of those things that I had emphasized throughout the course. Look at your sphere of influence. What opportunities do you have to look around you And it was so exciting when a couple of them said they had been, and I had a perfectly split class, Nancy, half black, half white. And I even had an immigrant. I had an indigenous Native American young man. It was very diverse. But it was interesting that the class ended up by saying they felt empowered. They felt they had skills to take action. They were a little tentative, perhaps earlier in the semester, but they did the right thing. They knew they did the right thing. They were feeling very confident to take the next step. And these are young people that aren't all educators. I had a couple of military members of the class, and some folks who were in our Winkies mental health field, as well as nurses. And it just was a good mix. And I have good hope for them to take some good actions and make some good trouble.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you were trying to be very careful and respectful of each of them, where they were as they learned, and monitored that so they didn't get too upset, but just looked at this as something they needed to learn more about and that they could take positive action. So it sounds like your experiences both at the elementary and the higher education level have been positive, and that people can engage in learning about race in a positive manner.
Absolutely, especially if they are open to it. And that's part of the challenge. And there will be some tentative moments, perhaps, but that can be growth inducing as well.
Right. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
I just would like to end by saying, I miss Winky, I miss Willie, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you to reflect on matters of importance to both you and me, but they were also important to Willie and Winky, and I thank you.
Well, thank you for honoring both of them today. It's also the second anniversary of Willie's passing, your beloved husband, and so we do this to honor him as well as our good friend Winky. So thank you so much for the good work that you're doing. I think you can be a role model to all of us and encourage all of us to continue to have this conversation about race and empower other people to speak up and take action. So thank you very much.
My pleasure, and thank you, and have a beautiful holiday and enjoy your family. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, happy Thanksgiving to you.
You too. Bye-bye, Nancy.
This has been Nancy Flinchbaugh with spiritualseedlings.com talking about race. Will you join me? If you would like me to interview you, please email me at nancy.flinchbaugh@gmail.com. You can read more about my work on my websites at spiritualseedlings.com and nancyflinchbaugh.com. Thank you for listening.